A few weeks ago, I made a video in which I developed information from a friend of mine who lives in France. He had shot a lovely, low focal length image of a region around the Orion Molecular Cloud Complex. But, as often happens to so many of us who do astrophotography, the weather was not cooperating, and he was only able to get just over 4 hours of information. Some persons asked why, when developing this image, I deviated from my usual development process, which is to separate the high and low frequency information in an image early on, and then sharpen the high frequency information using a process I call Synergistic sharpening, in which I stack the effects of 3 sharpening tools in Affinity Photo together. Those sharpening tools are the unsharp mask, the clarity tool, and the high pass filter. It's a good question, and in retrospect, I should have explained it when I was making the video. So I'm going to make a short video today to cover it. The reason I did not develop the image by my usual method was there was only just over 4 hours of information in the image, and unless one is using a telescope with an extremely low focal ratio, and even then on a target of at least moderate brightness, that's going to produce an information-poor image. Synergistic sharpening is a very effective technique for maximizing the sharpness capabilities within an image, but it only works well on images that are rich in information. That is to say, on images which are sometimes described as deep exposures. They have a lot of exposure time. For that kind of sharpening to work to its best effect, there has to be a lot of information available to work on. Otherwise, it's as if the sharpening tools get confused and try to sharpen things that aren't there. I mean, the sharpening tools are not conscious. They have no awareness. They have no idea what they're sharpening. They are simply math, refining the differences in light between pixels. And so pushing sharpening hard in an image that does not have a lot of information will result in an image that is frequently described as crunchy. I'll illustrate. Here's the image after the blur exterminator has been applied in PixInsight and it's been imported over to Affinity Photo for further developing. The first thing I'm going to do is run the frequency separation tool on the image. This is going to destroy the image or tear it into 2 parts, the low frequency and the high frequency part. Now on the left side of the image panel you can see the high frequency information, that's the sharpness, and on the right you can see the low frequency information containing the color and the brightness. Now, if you look at the circled area in the layer panel top right, you'll see 2 layers. They both say background. The lower one has a lock icon on it. Ignore that one, it's just a backup of the background layer. But I've activated the frequency separation tool and you can see the background layer will be separated into 2 layers named low frequency and high frequency. Let me get rid of that backup layer. We're not going to need it anymore. Now, if I turn off the high frequency layer, you can see the low frequency information. It's colorful and contains the brightness information, but that only, which is why it's very blurry. Now I'll turn on the high frequency information and turn off the low frequency information, and this will reveal the definition of the image, but most of the color and brightness information is gone. That's where our sharpness is. And in a normal sharpening process, it is to this information that we would apply the unsharp mask, clarity tool, and high pass filter in that process that I call synergistic sharpening. In synergistic sharpening, all of those tools are made to work together cohesively to support one another. But as you're about to see, in an information-poor image like this doesn't work. So watch what happens when I apply synergistic sharpening, the unsharp mask, clarity, and high pass filter tools to the image. As per usual, I'll begin with the unsharp mask. I'll put the unsharp mask inside the high frequency layer so it only affects that layer. It would be useless or even deleterious to the image to apply the unsharp mask to the low frequency layer. Now, by adjusting the radius slider, I'll increase the effect of the unsharp mask, with my usual goal of improving the sharpness of the high information areas of the image. The most information is going to be found in the image where there is the most light, which is primarily around the Great Orion Nebula. There is also a bit more information to be found around the Horsehead Nebula and the accompanying Flame Nebula, but it's not nearly as much as the Great Orion Nebula. It is very bright within the image. But by contrast, all the other regions of the image are information poor. And if you watch the rest of the image as I am increasing the sharpness of the Great Orion Nebula, you will see they become slowly over-sharpened, just a little bit, but that's what crunchiness is, that over-sharpening. Now I'm going to apply the clarity tool, and with the clarity tool the effect is going to be even stronger because what clarity does is apply a subtle but significant contrast increase to certain frequencies of the midtones. And it's very powerful for bringing out sharpness within the brightest area right around the Great Orion Nebula, but it too makes those darker regions quite crunchy. When I turn it off, you can see those regions soften up, and when I turn it back on, you can see those regions become crunchy. Then finally, let's apply the high pass filter. Now when the high-pass filter becomes active, the entire image becomes blurry. However, that's normal. You have to choose a composite for the high-pass filter to apply itself to the image. The normally recommended composite method is linear light, but that's only for information-rich images, in particular images that you would shoot here on Earth of Earth-based subjects. Pretty much all astrophotography, unless you're shooting a target like the sun, is information poor by comparison. So the better composite or blend mode by which to apply the high-pass filter is soft light. With the soft light blend or composite mode applied, I'm going to move the radius slider bar until I have adequately sharpened the appearance of the brighter areas of the image, particularly focusing on the Great Orion Nebula. But you'll notice that it too adds to the crunchiness of all the more information-poor regions of the image, which is pretty much the rest of the image. That applies a bit less to the region around the Horsehead and the Flame Nebulae because they're semi-bright. Nonetheless, take a look at what it does to the image. Let me select all three of those sharpening tools together and show you how powerful is the effect. In other words, how crunchy they make the image when acting synergistically. I'll turn off all the sharpening tools now, and you can see all the dark and dim regions soften up nicely. And when I turn them back on, all the darker regions, pretty much everything except for the Great Orion Nebula, and to a lesser degree the region immediately around the Flame and Horsehead Nebulae, everywhere there's less information in the image becomes crunchy again. So this is why I did not sharpen my friend's image with my usual method of frequency separation, then applying synergistic sharpening to the high frequency information. If you have an image that is information poor, or in other words, the exposure did not go on for very long, it's important to go light on the sharpening. Now, the Blur Exterminator is AI driven, and it tends to do a pretty good job with sharpening even if an image is information poor. But the other sharpening tools, the unsharp mask, clarity tool, and high pass filter in Affinity Photo, and related tools that one might find in other developing applications such as Photolab 8, which is another development application that I have a strong preference for. These work best when they are working with rich information and can actually be deleterious to an image if the image is information poor. They can still be used, but they must be used with a lighter touch. So because of this, I find that a better sharpening procedure working with an information poor image is to do what I think of as a partial shear of the high frequency information. I'll go back to the original video that I made on this topic and show what I did here. Here, I've circled two layers called pixel. The highlighted pixel layer is just a duplicate of the pixel layer below. The duplicate is selected, that's what the highlight indicates. With that layer selected, I opened the frequency separation tool and moved the radius slider to the right until I saw just a little bit of the fine detail begin to show through. In other words, I sheared away the sharpest of the fine detail information. Then I deleted the low frequency information as it is unrequired, then selected the high frequency information and applied the soft light composite mode to it, which blended back the image's own high frequency information containing its sharpest detail back onto itself. In an information-poor image like this technique naturally mostly applies sharpening to information-rich areas of the image where there is information to be sharpened, and does little to affect information-poor areas of an image, where trying to force sharpness to increase would only result in a crunchy image. I'll turn the star layer on so you can get a fuller idea of what the image looks like. There's still a little bit more work to do to this image, some lingering green in there that needs to be extracted, and some lens aberrations in the upper and lower right, but they're easily dealt with. And they aren't really the subject of this video anyway. Now I'll just switch over to the exported completed image. I would imagine that you may have another question. How does one know if an image is information poor, wherein one should use the high frequency shearing technique? You know, by and large I don't use any kind of measurement tool to determine this assessment. I find this particular kind of assessment is best made with the old Mark I eyeball. What I look at is the dark and dimmer regions of the image, say around here, and here, and here. If I begin to sharpen an image and those dark and dimmer regions begin to look crunchy, it means they do not have enough information in them yet. When an image is sufficiently information rich, sharpening the detail should have little effect on the dimmer or even darkest regions of an image, because well-measured dimness and darkness are part of the information as well. And the sharpening tools only have deleterious effects in those areas of an image that have insufficient information. So I hope that answers your questions in regard to when to partially shear and reapply high-frequency information, as opposed to going with full-powered sharpening techniques such as synergistic sharpening. If you have any questions or observations, however, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. As always, thank you for watching, And with spring coming, hopefully the weather is going to get better where you are so that you too can get out there and shoot that marvelous sky.